Look at a global map of oil reserves. One region immediately stands out: the Middle East. A place known today for vast deserts, futuristic skylines, enormous wealth, political tensions, and global strategic importance. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates together control nearly half of the world's conventional oil reserves. But here's the mystery. Why here? Why is so much of Earth's oil buried beneath this region? Why not Europe? Why not Africa? Why not South Asia? To answer that question, we need to travel back hundreds of millions of years, long before deserts existed, long before cities were built, and long before humans even walked the earth. Because the story of Middle Eastern oil begins beneath an ancient ocean that has completely disappeared from the modern world. And that's exactly what we explore here on Ordinary Things: Deep History. Most people think oil is simply a black liquid trapped underground. But oil is actually ancient life. Hundreds of millions of years ago, Earth's oceans were filled with microscopic organisms called plankton and algae. These tiny life forms floated near the ocean surface and captured energy from sunlight through photosynthesis. They multiplied in enormous numbers across warm, tropical seas. When they died, their remains slowly sank toward the seafloor. Normally, those remains would decay completely, but sometimes something unusual happened. If the remains were buried quickly beneath layers of sediment before oxygen could destroy them, they survived long enough to begin a transformation deep underground. Over millions of years, pressure increased, temperatures rose. Chemical reactions slowly reshaped this buried organic material. First, it became kerogen. Then, deeper underground, kerogen slowly transformed into crude oil and natural gas. In simple terms, oil is ancient sunlight stored underground for millions of years. But this leads to another question. If oceans once covered much of Earth's surface, why did so much oil form specifically in the Middle East? The answer begins with a vanished ocean called the Tethys Sea. Around 100 million years ago, much of what is now the Middle East looked completely different from today. Instead of deserts, the region was covered by a warm, shallow tropical sea stretching between Africa, Arabia, and Eurasia. This sea created the perfect conditions for oil formation. It was warm, it was shallow, and it was rich in nutrients carried by ancient rivers flowing from surrounding continents. Those nutrients allowed microscopic marine organisms to multiply in enormous numbers. Generation after generation lived and died there. Their remains settled on the seafloor in thick organic layers over millions of years. But something even more important was happening below the surface. Large areas of the Tethys Sea had very little oxygen near the bottom. Without oxygen, bacteria could not fully break down organic remains. Instead of disappearing, those remains accumulated layer after layer. Over time, sediments buried them deeper and deeper beneath the seafloor. This created one of the richest petroleum source regions anywhere on Earth. However, forming oil is only part of the story. Oil must also be trapped underground, otherwise it escapes. And this is where the Middle East became unusually lucky. Millions of years ago, parts of the region experienced intense evaporation as ancient inland seas dried up. This left behind thick underground salt layers. Salt is extremely important in oil geology, because salt forms a perfect seal. It prevents oil from escaping upward through rock layers. Instead, petroleum collects beneath it. Over time, enormous underground reservoirs formed. Some became the largest oil accumulations ever discovered on Earth. These are known as supergiant oil fields. But there is still another mystery. If oil formed beneath an ocean floor, why is it now buried beneath deserts? The answer lies in the slow movement of Earth itself. The surface of our planet is divided into massive moving sections called tectonic plates. These plates move only a few centimeters each year, but over millions of years, their movement reshapes continents. Around 50 million years ago, the Arabian tectonic plate began pushing northward into the Eurasian plate. As these plates collided, the ancient floor of the Tethys Sea slowly rose above sea level. What was once ocean became land. What was once seabed became desert. And hidden inside that rising land were enormous oil reserves formed millions of years earlier. Interestingly, people in the region actually encountered oil long before modern drilling began. In ancient Mesopotamia, natural bitumen sometimes leaked to the surface. It was used to waterproof boats. It was used as mortar in construction. and it was even used in early roads. Ancient people knew something unusual existed beneath their feet. They just didn't know how important it would become. Everything changed in the early 20th century. As cars replaced horses, as airplanes connected continents, and as factories powered industrial economies, oil became the most important energy source on Earth. Suddenly, the Middle East became strategically important to global powers. British companies began exploring Persian oil fields. American companies soon followed across the Arabian Peninsula. Pipelines crossed deserts, ports expanded, and the region slowly transformed into the center of global petroleum production. Another reason Middle Eastern oil became so influential is something surprisingly simple. It is easier to extract. In many parts of the world, oil lies extremely deep underground or trapped inside difficult rock formations. But across much of the Middle East, petroleum reservoirs are relatively shallow. The surrounding rocks are highly porous, and underground pressure often helps push oil upward naturally. This made production faster and cheaper than in most other regions, which helped turn Middle Eastern oil into the backbone of 20th century global energy supply. By the 1960s, oil-producing countries in the region began working together through an organization called OPEC. For the first time, major producers coordinated production levels. This gave them influence over global oil prices. Energy was no longer just geology. It became geopolitics. Oil shaped alliances, oil shaped economies, and sometimes oil shaped conflicts, which is why it earned the nickname Black Gold. But there is one important reality we cannot ignore. Oil takes hundreds of millions of years to form, yet humanity can consume it in only a few centuries. Today, the world is slowly shifting toward renewable energy sources like solar power, wind energy, hydropower, geothermal energy, and biomass. Interestingly, many Middle Eastern countries are now investing heavily in solar power, using the same sunlight that once powered ancient oceans millions of years ago. So the next time you see images of endless desert landscapes in the Middle East, remember what lies beneath them. An ancient ocean, billions of microscopic organisms, millions of years of pressure and heat, moving continents, ancient salt seas, rising mountains, and one of the most valuable natural resources in human history. Stories like this remind us how the deep past continues shaping the modern world. And that's exactly what we uncover here on Ordinary Things, Deep History.